So I am a big picture person. It's really important that you understand the big picture, because then you can understand the little pictures. Sometimes we think the little picture is the big picture, but it's not. Once we understand the big picture, the little pictures that are yet to come, because there will be more, I can see what's happening there. You can start to identify the movers and shakers, who's speaking, and how it all comes together. So I have a PowerPoint here, obviously, and it may be a little bit different than the last time. I don't go by my notes, so there's so much one could say. It's just whatever pops in on the night, as it were. So He Wakaputanga is really what we're talking about tonight. But before we actually talk about this founding document and declaration that we have in New Zealand, we need to go back in history, and then quite a way back, and then we'll bring ourselves forward, and then you'll understand the predicament we are in right now today, and why Wakaputanga has been shot down the memory hole, and it's only now just coming up to take a breath. It's never died. It's just been stuffed so far down that no one's really known about it. What I'm going to be talking about is in these books here, particularly We Are Revolting, is the geopolitical big picture. Historically, it goes way back to, I'll say for argument's sake, Nimrod, the day of Nimrod. He was a one world tyrant, a one world king. He had a one world religion. And from that one place where all the peoples gathered and grew to quite an enormous city, then they dispersed, as many of you may know, with the mixing of the languages. But today I'm going to come a little bit further up to about 2000 BC, and we're going to talk about a group of people called the Canaanites. The Canaanites, scripturally or in the Bible, I'm going to reference the Bible quite a bit, and particularly the King James Bible, because the people who see us as useless eaters, that see us as the enemy, they use the King James Bible and they flip it on its head. So God of the Bible that we know is the tyrant, and Lucifer is the enlightened one who came and set Adam and Eve free. Everything's upside down. Everything they do, they reference the Bible or ancient mystery gods and deities, particularly the Greek and the Roman. But usually they're all the same anyway. They've just got, some have got the Greek names, some have got the Roman names. But the Canaanites were a war nation. They were harsh, tyrannical. They didn't mince around. They were known everywhere and fed everywhere. And one of the things they did was to sacrifice their young to their gods. Now, their god is the same god that came out of Nimrod's day, and that is Baal. We also know him as Bel, B-E-L, which will take on a little bit more significance later on in tonight's talk. Marduk. We also know him as Osiris or Horus, part of the Isis, Horus and Set, or Ishtar, Osiris and Horus, their son Horus, that comes from the time of Nimrod, when Nimrod was killed. So it was turned into a kind of a religious thing, a dogma, and it sort of developed in its own right. It became quite significant in Egypt, and then as we go further up into Babylon, it really just took on a life of its own. But here we are in the Canaanites. They sacrificed their babies, and already you probably realize that the same thing is happening today, particularly with abortion and some of the events that we're looking at currently about to be mandated in the next few weeks. Child sacrifice is big. bloodletting is a big feature of Baal worship or Baal worship. So God said in the scriptures, destroy them, get rid of them. Now, he wasn't saying genocide, and in fact, many of them had escaped out of that Canaan area at the time because there was a catastrophic collapse in civilization that historians are still trying to dig through and work out. But there was famines, earthquakes, societies just collapsed everywhere. That was also the beginning of the end for the Egyptian dynasty, and we had the Sea peoples, again not really sure who they are, although they are in some Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so things were starting to fall apart anyway as the Israelites were coming into that place. As they came in, there was one city or fortress, Canaanite fortress, that was still standing, and that was Jericho. The Israelites marched around the city for a week, and then they marched around 7 days in silence, I think, in those days. And then the last day they marched around, and then they yelled and made a cacophony of noise with mouth and instruments and whatever else, and the walls came tumbling down. And I've been to Jericho, and this is not a photo I took, but this is what it looks like even today. So many of the people in Jericho were killed, and there were other Canaanite cities that the Israelites destroyed as well. But typically, you know, it's the rats that leave the sinking ship first, and most of the Canaanite nobles had already left the area and moved up to what we know as Tunisia, and they set up the ancient city of Carthage from scratch. By this stage, the Canaanites weren't really known as the Canaanites. They were known as the Phoenicians. This is another pattern you'll notice, and even today, it's rebranding, rebranding, rebranding. That way it gets very hard to track yourself back to where is the genesis of this problem. It changes, and the United Nations is, you know, just great for that, just change out all the time, so you really don't know. But they were now the Phoenicians, and that just means wearers of purple. And it'd be a little bit like me saying I'm a New Zealander and I'm a Kiwi. They were Canaanites, they were Phoenicians. They worshipped the same gods, Baal and Bel, and they sacrificed their children as well. This here is Potts. This is a Rockefeller. He is one of our elites, as we know today, the Rockefeller, House of Rockefeller. And this is a Rockefeller archaeological dig, and these urns are full of babies that were sacrificed in Carthage back in the day. If you were really rich, you could swap out for a dog, or a cat. But on the whole, it was your child. So no wonder Rockefeller is holding on to that nice and tightly, because all intents and purposes, they're probably his ancestors. The other thing with the Phoenicians, besides where we get our words from, particularly phone and phonics, and any PH word comes from the Phoenician times, they also had a lot of kind of word trickery going on in the day as well, which is where we get a lot of that, particularly in the Black's Law Dictionary today, where we plebs have got our, you know, common dictionaries for us, and the Law Society, the bigwigs, have got their own dictionary with a whole different set of definitions. That basically came out of this time. They were also great on the sea. And you would have seen back a couple of pictures here, all their waterways. The security was really, really tight, and they were into trade. They developed the Admiralty, Maritime Admiralty law, and that is involved in that contract law or corporate law. All that kind of comes under sort of international law, as it were, because they trade with all different countries, and they needed to have one standard, so everyone was on the same page when it came to trade. So they were all over the place, and we can see where they've been, because they leave their mark. For example, in Britain, if you go to Cornwall or anywhere over there to the west, you'll see the square Venetian wells. The Angles and the Saxons that became the Anglo-Saxons, they made round wells. The Phoenicians did the square wells. And the Phoenicians were particularly big on trade and sourcing tin. and Britain was known as the Isle, rich in tin. So they had already been up there doing a lot of trade way back in BC. We know they got to America because this was Bale stone was found in the 1960s, 1964 in Hampshire, and it says on it, to Bale on behalf of the Canaanites. This is dedicated. There in the same site where this was found, there's also an altar for sacrifice, and there's a kind of a mini Stonehenge as well, with very interesting lines when you kind of start to draw a straight line across the globe. We know they got to China because archaeologists have found a lot of mummies there and quote unquote looked like they belong in Denmark. They're clearly Caucasian and very fair. We know they got to North America. Same thing there. There's a lot of archaeological diggings, and there's a lot of mysterious things like the ancient wheels that the indigenous Indians don't really know much about, except they belong to the ancient ones, probably the Canaanites. These graves that they found in North America, the mummies are wrapped up in woven cloth, and the North American Indians use skins. So, and again, they tended to be more Caucasian in appearance. So they got everywhere. And it would appear from books like this one, Forbidden History, that they came to New Zealand. Now, we know very little about that. They were here 1,000+ years ago. There is a little settlement at up near in Pukekoi area there that's being cordoned off so no one can go. There have been enormous grave sites found and then just dug back in. The history we get is the history those above want to give us. Queen Victoria's Prime Minister said that this world is for the few and very few, just the few at the very top. And we get all our information, anything we believe, basically, is what they filter through for us. So it's interesting that we're not allowed to know much about the ancient history of New Zealand. And there will be a reason why they've decided that that is not for us. And it won't be one that is going to do us good. We know here in New Zealand, particularly over the last 200 years, there has been a move to divide and conquer. That's one thing that the Canaanites, the Phoenicians were really good at. Here in Carthage, oh no, I'll wait a minute. When they're going to migrate again in a minute, I'll talk about that then. And we know today among Māori and non-Māori, we look at each other with a little bit of distrust or a little bit of animosity, and that has been created predominantly from legislations and those that reign over us. We know that Māori and particularly the British folk got on well because they intermarried very, very early, and I think that's an endorsement for any bicultural community when there isn't that stigma. So we were a fledgling nation that had a lot of peace and prosperity about it, but the Canaanites and those that have come from the Canaanites, that's something that they cannot abide. So Carthage in the end, Hannibal was part of the Carthage, and it's that famous ride across the Alps with his elephants, because the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, historically warred with pagan Rome, and we see later on with papal Rome. They are the arch enemies, the Canaanites and the Romans. And there's a bit of mixing as well. You can't really say that there's two clear people groups here, but they are both vying for dominance of this world. So Hannibal took his elephants over the Alps and got the victory, and then there was a Roman soldier known as Maximus Fabius, and he came sometime later during the Punic Wars and destroyed Carthage. and you go to Carthage today and it's just ruins. Now Fabian, he had this thing, we will wait patiently, and when we strike, we'll strike hard. I don't know how you're feeling over the last 2 years, how we were just had a fairly nice life, didn't we, relatively, and how with current events, it's like they're striking hard, and that gamble is coming down solidly. So from Fabius, we get the Fabian Society, and this started in 1883. We have George Bernard Shaw, we've got Orwell there, we've got Huxley's there, we've got a whole lot of different players there, and you can see them. This is a stained glass window that was created in 1884. It actually got lost, and it was found, or stolen, it was found in America. And this is Fabian Tony Blair, Ardern's mentor, warmonger Tony Blair, and Ardern was over there doing the big cover-up for the pedophile Freemasons in the police force. That was her job. She did a good job, and then she came on back home. And these are the people here in the 1800s. This is the Marxist altar, and they're all worshipping the Marxist altar of the few and very few who reign over us. Up the top there, you can see they're bashing the globe. One of the Fabian mottos is to craft it closer to our heart's desire. They have an image for this world. They know what they want. They know what they want to do with us, how many are going to be left, and how they're going to dispose of us. And there have been plans through history, and they're creating this earth for themselves. So their motto is, when I strike hard. Also, their logo is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Everything the elites do today, everything that really from the Canaanites up do, they do it in plain sight. Nothing's hidden. We just are too busy, kept too busy as debt slaves, working hard to pay our taxes and put food on the table to really see. And when we do see it, it kind of just goes over us. We don't take it seriously, but we need to start really waking up and seeing these things happening around us. There was a book written by an Australian called Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, and she identified most of the Australian prime ministers as Fabians. Anyway, Carthage was being destroyed, and per usual, the nobles and their families, the rats, left the sinking ship first, and the rest went down. And they ran to Padua initially, and then into Venice. Now, by this stage, and they're settling there. Around this time, we're going to start looking at the defeat of the pagan Roman Empire, and in the ashes, we have papal Rome, or the papal Roman Empire. That's the Roman Catholic Church. So this isn't against Roman Catholic individuals here. I have Roman Catholic family members. This is about the organization. This is about pagan Rome coming out of the ashes, papal Rome coming out of the ashes of pagan Rome. And that's why you'll see the phoenix or the pelican. That's the symbol of its resurrection. So the reason they went to the swampy lagoon was because they were still warring with pagan Rome and then with papal Rome. This is where they could hide out without the horses coming in with the army. The nobles, there was no middle class during this time, of course, because it's the few and the slaves. The nobles all sent their children to Padua University, up a little bit further, just there in Italy. And they were drenched in Aristotelian belief. Aristotle and Plato, for that matter, just sunk into the history books as evil, nefarious philosophies for many centuries, and it's really been over the last few hundred years that it's been brought into our focus, and the reason why it disappeared out of view is because that same thing, that it's the few that rule over the many. Aristotelian belief carried by the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, and by the time we get to Venice, we're now calling them the Venetians. The Canaanites, the Phoenicians, and the Venetians were great on the sea, and they were fabulous at trade. So that brings in the banking, and they were fabulous at slavery. That was their two strengths. They have no creativity. They just roll out the same thing again and again and again, which is why once you understand the big picture, you can see them at work pretty quickly. When this COVID thing first hit, not for a second did I think it was real. I knew it was coming. I mentioned it in We're Revolting, not because I had any insight, or at least, you know, of what may happen, but because I know the way these people work and I know what they're planning. They've had the SARS, they've had the swine flu, they've had the bird flu, all just forerunners, getting it all sharp and shiny. So when they hit, they can hit hard. So we have been born to be ruled. They're very sure about that. And that is why we have out-of-control governments and runaway governments. Not only do we have that Aristotelian belief carried by the elite today, right back from Nimrod and the Canaanites, but we've also got Darwinism that basically destroyed science based on scriptures, or at least in line with scriptures. This book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, is about the situation we're in today, the oligarchy, the few and very few that are reigning over the many. And this examines, particularly with the Enlightenment period that was created by Venetian, Sarpe, and also the British Royal Society. All that was created to make sure that the ancient mystery religion was to be brought back bit by bit, and the evil, the enemy of ancient mystery religion is Christianity, Protestant Christianity, because Protestant Christianity says that we as individuals are very important. We're more important than the whole. But from our importance, we help and we reach out. Where much is given, much is expected. But it's done from the heart. It's not done with a heavy hand from above, where the whole is more important than the individual. So Protestant Christianity, you look at countries that have prospered, particularly in the 1900s and through to, probably all of the 1900s, they have been Protestant Christian countries. It didn't mean that you had to be a Christian, by the way. It's just that those were the foundational philosophies, and We're Revolting particularly looks at that angle from the West. What has happened in the West? How has it been battered, controlled, deceived? And I show the movers and shakers there. So we have Darwinian. Huxley, that's a name that comes up all over the place in the United Nations, particularly with UNESCO, because that is the science and educational wing of United Nations. Its number one job, along with United Nations, was to bring in a one world religion. We're told that it was to bring amicable resolutions amongst, warring countries, but their number one plan was to bring in a one world religion. So we strip Christianity, or being made in the image of God, out of our learning. We strip that we have inalienable rights as an individual under God, and we put in a government. All been slowly happening over the centuries. As I say, the Venetians, their enemy was Papal Rome. That's why Papal Rome started to build its three crowns, meaning that it now is declaring that it is Lord, the papacy is Lord over hell, earth, and heaven. It all sits on a pine cone, which is a fertility symbol that is dedicated to Baal, or dedicated to Bel. Venice has St. Mark's, the Vatican has St. Peter's. Venice has the winged lion, that they stole from Rome, actually, but the Vatican has the dragon or the snake. So they're always warring against each other. So we look at the 100 Years' War, the War of the Roses, all the wars that we've known historically have been, 30-Year War, have been predominantly between Venice and the Vatican. Who is going to win? You know, there's different worldviews when you study wars and you study history, and they camouflage themselves. They always have, they always will. So it's not often easy to see the facts in these wars, particularly when beginning of the 1900s, when the House of Rockefeller took over all publishing, all educational material, and started editing encyclopedias and books. And any classical book you get after the 1940s, whether it be a Austen or a Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, they've all been edited. They are no longer the original script, just in little ways, all been edited because they have an agenda. They've got to shape our minds, craft the earth in the way that they want it to go. So there they are in Venice, the Venetians, but Spain is starting to rise in prominence, and Spain, or at least the Spanish, the Habsburg kings and their governing forces believed with all their breath that God was Spanish. It was interchangeable. So to be Catholic was to be Spanish was to be Catholic. And they got preeminence on the sea. So that stole Venice's trade, and it stole the slave trade. But it's all right because the Vatican picked up on that as well. Vatican being pagan Rome in disguise. That's why when you go to many cathedrals today, you'll see perhaps someone that is David. But when you look closely, he's got goat's hooves. And we know, well, David didn't have goat hooves, but Pan did. The god Pan had goat's hooves. So papal Rome just gave Jupiter, I think he became Paul, Pan became David, Isis became the Virgin Mary, and I go into that quite a bit, and we're revolting just to make sure people are understanding what's happening. So the poor old Venetians had to move on again, and basically in about the 1700s, they packed up all their family and they headed to another kind of lagoon, and that was in the Netherlands. And there we have Deutsche Bank. That's they're all about trade, and they started Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is a very nefarious bank, and it is the funder of what we know as common purpose, which Julia Middleton out of the UK has been the face for, really. And it is now all over the world, including New Zealand. If you go onto LinkedIn, often it says we want common purpose trained individuals. And if you think our police are acting beyond their authority, that's one of the common purpose books, acting beyond your authority. It's because most of them have been through a common purpose course. You are selected. You can't just choose to. They've got to get the right kind of mind. If you're too something that they feel they can't shape, they won't take you. It's by invitation only. And they are. The last protest I went to, they grabbed me, a policeman lunged through the crowd and grabbed me by the throat it was unneeded, strange, but the police were more militarized than we would be used to, particularly with their oath to protect the people and to keep the peace. Okay, so here we are now in the 1500s. We've got King Henry on the throne. He's got that, his brother's wife, actually, isn't it, Mary? And she won't give him a male heir, so he's got to think about how to get rid of her. And rather than asking the ministers, we're still in the Dark Ages here, by the way, we've got the papacy as the tyranny of the day. But rather than ask any of the ecclesiasticals, he decided to send out a request to the universities. How do I get rid of this woman? There was a Venetian, Giorgio, and Contarini was a friend of his, and he got into the palace and he created how Henry VIII could pull away, annul that marriage, and in the end pull away from the Catholic Church of Rome, because Venetians needed to split the papal Rome and to try and get something themselves. So that was their agenda in that, although Henry VIII did not realize. It didn't go totally according to their plan, but it did divide Britain away from papal Europe. So they were there. Later on in history, the Venetians became the Venetian Party, or we know them commonly as the Whig Party. And they are significant moving up through history as well. It was the Venetian Party that started the East India Trading Company that destroyed China and took opium into a beautiful country and destroyed the social fabric of that country, and also destroyed India. It was Elizabeth II that actually charted this. She probably didn't really know what was happening. She wouldn't have really understood that the Venetians were in total control, thank you very much. And away they went, just destroying everything they could destroy. So we're coming to the end of the Dark Ages, but it didn't just end naturally. It was fought for, and it was spearheaded by a German chap called Martin Luther. And he decided that the papacy wasn't the single source of truth, that their narrative didn't have to be believed, that their narrative had nothing to do, particularly because, you know, they were saying they were Christian, but their narrative had nothing to do with the scriptures whatsoever. And so he put his thesis on the Wittenberg Church, and it just started a furore, really, like we're seeing today. So we, the people, got in behind him and started to move the whole tyranny out of the way. It was so bad that no one was allowed bows and arrows, because you disarm your population. Then they didn't have guns, so no bows and arrows for the commoners in case they took out the Pope riding on his horse or one of the Pope's guards. So it was at this stage, and we're going to come back to him in a little bit later on, because it's something significant that really won the day. Yes, we the people and the millions were behind him, and he was certainly the brave soul that decided to stand up. He wasn't the first. 100 years prior, I think it was Huss, had already stood up and got burnt for his troubles, but Martin Luther was prepared to go the same way. So at the time that Martin Luther actually won the day, with a little bit more help, which I'll tell you about, the Venetians decided this was their moment to get into the papacy, into the Vatican, and be part of their infiltration to take over the Vatican. So they, during the Council of Trent, when they were deciding what they were going to do with these Protestants that wouldn't come under their control and thought that they could negotiate with God on their own, the Venetians, Contarini, said, hey, I'm going to set up a order, and we're going to call them well, they're going to be the Jesuits, but they're going to be Society of Jesus, because you always sneak it in. It's always got to look humanitarian. Oh, yes, we need to inject our babies because, you know, it's good for them. It's always a humanitarian reason. And so he got another Venetian, this chap here. His name is Ignatius of Loyola. He was a Spanish, actually, but he was a military man. Got wounded. He had a very dark, sinister time in a cave where he had a lot of visions of this beautiful snake that would talk to him. He was the first superior general of the Jesuits. And then you can see IHS there again. That cross is there. Cross is actually a satanic Luciferian symbol, by the way. That's why Jesus was hung on it. And IHS, we're told, means in his service. It means Isis, Horus, and Set. And that is the ancient mystery religion. That is Baal, that is Baal, Osiris, and Ishtar, and their boy Horus. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. So the Vatican thought, Great. So the Jesuits are really a military wing of the Vatican from that point on, and Napoleon will tell you that, and so will many other people in history, which I also have in We're Revolting, very clear that this Jesuit faction of the Vatican were far removed from Christianity and religion as at all possible. It was the Jesuits that started up the sugar plantations and slavery, because the Canaanites, the Venetians, the Romans, one of their big areas of making money is slavery. At this time too, in the 1600s, 1700s, in South America, we have the reductions, the Jesuit reductions. The Jesuits became crazy rich, and the Indians were put into reductions, like, you know, human settlements, the United Nations calls it today, just big super cities really. There were 50-something of them there. They were looked after, you got your medicine, you were fed and clothed, oh, and we gave you sports and we entertained you so you didn't know you were slaves. And they made beautiful violins and all sorts of beautiful crafting work, clocks, and the Jesuits really became very rich, so rich that the papacy realized if they didn't do something, the papacy was going to be at risk of being taken down. And that's when the Jesuit reductions were finished in Paraguay and Brazil and areas like that. Very hard to find very much about it now because of our edited history. But everything they do is to enslave the people. They are born to rule, we are born to be ruled. And their number one symbol to make sure that we all understand, at least subliminally, is that they have an obelisk. And part of the word obelisk is bell, B-E-L, which is what I was saying before, bell, Baal. This is bell. And really what it is the generative principle of Osiris, because when he was killed, Ishtar found all his body pieces and put it all together except for this. So she made a stone one, because Nimrod, and this is really, Osiris is Nimrod, and Nimrod's wife, when she realized that Nimrod was dead, and then oh whoopsie, I'm pregnant, but not to Nimrod, how am I going to handle this? She decided that Nimrod came back, and that she was actually had Nimrod's baby, and that's where we get Horus, and where we get our word horizon. Horus has risen each day. That's all part of that ancient mystery religion. So the obelisk is a really, really important part of the fertility symbol and the symbol of total power. You are controlled, you are dominated. So the biggest one, the tallest one in the world is in St. Peter's in Vatican City there, and this actually came from Egypt. Many of the ones around the world are from ancient Egypt. There's more outside of Egypt now than there is, and then there's modern day ones. The Vatican, the papacy, you had to be Roman Catholic during the Dark Ages or you were dead. The auto de fe was going all the time, people were being burnt all the time. It was a very fearful time to be around. If you want to have a grueling read, read Fox's Book of Martyrs, and that will really put you in the picture there. It was a pretty ugly time, and certainly a time that they're wanting to take us back to now, if they can. I don't believe they will, but they're sure trying. So we have Cleopatra's Needle in England on the embankment there, just outside the City of London. The City of London, well, let me step back. England was hijacked by the Jesuits during the Glorious Revolution, when William of Orange, although he was supposed to be a Protestant, he was backed by the Jesuits and he was put in there, and that opened the entrance for the Jesuits to take control of England. 1666, during the Great Fires of London, that was supposed to have been a baker on Baker Street that accidentally set alight that fire. It wasn't, and in fact it was a Roman Catholic that stepped up to take the blame, and he was hanged, although he wasn't even in London at the time. But the point of clearing London was to get us into the point where we were now lost at sea with the Siskiyou Trust, where you had 7 years to say, hey, I'm alive. The problem being the people were never told, so they didn't say, hey, I'm alive. And in the meantime, there's a square mile within Greater London that is not owned by Britain. That is owned by the Vatican. And if the Queen wants to go in there, she must be invited. And when she gets there, she bows to a higher power, and that is the superior general of the Jesuits, known as the Black Pope. The first person that the white Pope goes to see when he's inaugurated is the Black Pope. He gets all his instructions from the Black Pope. The white Pope is just for us. Oh, sugar wouldn't melt in his mouth. But behind him is the Black Pope, and it's that yin and yang thing of the ancient mystery religion. So we have that there on the embankment, and it is guarded by dragons there. Oh no, they're Phoenix, are they? Phoenix, beg your pardon. But there are dragons all around the city of London as well. So then we come to Washington. So Washington was hijacked very early on. We hear about the Irish potato famine, and yes, there was a famine, but what we don't know is there were 7 frigates loads of food left Southern Ireland every day to cause famine in that land and drive the Irish Catholics to America. And when they got there, they were hated. It took several generations for them to integrate well. And again, in my book, I've got many quotes from Abraham Lincoln through to many of the early presidents really worrying about the Jesuits that are now here. How are we going to stop this? The Civil War could have been over in weeks, says Abraham Lincoln, except the Jesuits. They were playing both sides, and it went on for years. So when was America hijacked? Well, it was under the 1871 Act. All rights, the freedom of speech, holding arms, owning private property, travel, etc., no longer rights but privileges, because that's what we have with the Canaan, with the Venetians, the Romans, Papal Rome. Everything is privileges, and we see that in the United Nations. It's a privilege. Don't think it's the rights of the woman or rights of the children. There's no rights there. It's all privileges. The only rights we have are the inalienable rights that we've got under God. We don't need any man to give us what we already have. It's all part of that trickery. So the way they did this is they put everything into capitals, which in the Chicago Sign Manual tells us that that actually is a foreign language, and it's a sign language, actually. A sign language. So we, knowing how to read, we see that as the Constitution of the United States of America. But legally, it's a picture. There's nothing to read there. It's just a picture. And there's a Roman maxim, he who will be deceived, let him be deceived. And that's what we are. We're being totally deceived. That is why when you get a letter through the mail paying a bill, your name will all be in all caps. And that comes from your birth certificate when your mother, the informant, like I was to my beautiful children, unbeknownst to myself, signed my the birth registration. I signed my children over to the Vatican, and they were lost at sea, dead. And that is why they also now get their name in capitals, because only corporations are in capitals. Corporate, or it comes from the word corpse, dead. That's why traditionally tombstones are always in capitals. You're dead. So that's the way, in a nutshell. It's much bigger than that, but we must move on as when America was hijacked. Washington, D.C., again, is not owned by America. It's in America, but it is not owned by America. It is owned by the Vatican. And it used to be called Maryland, and it was a plot of land there that a Roman Catholic family in the early days, and the names just escape me, it'll come back shortly, donated to the Vatican. And Washington, D.C., when you look at maps there, you'll see a whole lot of ancient mystery religion, from the owl to the number of streets that come in for the ancient sun wheel, and certain numbers, and where the Masonic temple is. I think it's on 13th Street. All the symbolism is there. So that's when they were hijacked. So I'm kind of setting the scene so you can get a bit of a picture just in the back of your mind that, is New Zealand being hijacked? So that's what we're kind of heading towards now. So who are the movers and shakers, or at least where is the shop front? Here it is at the United Nations. It was a plot of land in New York given by the Rockefellers to set up the United Nations, because they tried to, the elites, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, the papacy tried to get into America very early through the League of Nations, but it was ousted very quickly for the number of communists that were there and the problems that they were creating, so it collapsed. They'd already organized World War I, so okay, League of Nations didn't take off, let's just ramp up for World War II. And it might be worth mentioning at this point that, like Ardern says in her, often, and also in her National Review, voluntary National Review that cost us thousands of, if not, well, plenty, probably 1 million plus to write. That's her little auditing for the United Nations. No one left behind. So you're not going to be left behind. No one's going to be left behind. And that's really what the United Nations are wanting to do. So they got into New York there. They built their building, and now everything's coming out from there. So what I was going to say is we had World War II. We also had the French Revolution, Spanish Revolution, the Russian Revolution, French Revolution, and you're looking at 100 to nearly 200 million people destroyed, killed through really, well, really the 20th century, but some of those revolutions were a little bit before that. So just to put it into perspective, no one left behind. Often we sort of think, oh, those Caucasians, those white people, they're so privileged. During the 1900s, or once we got to the end of World War II, Caucasians were 10% of the world's population. Prior to the revolutions, we were 30%. So we've had our day, They have hammered us. They're still hammering us. No one's going to be left behind here. But they attend to different people groups in their own time and in their own way. We're all getting it now with the mRNA modification, that the messenger that they're trying to pump into us. So they're getting angry now. They're getting shorter time. They're wanting to strike hard and furious. But it all comes from the United Nations. And here we have the pelican or the phoenix rising up. And this is just letting you know, this is the big mural in the security chamber at the United Nations, just letting you know, we're onto this, we've got you. And you've got things like here, a woman opening the window to the east, because that's horizon, Horus has risen. Ancient mystery religion, we have Pan here, playing his pan flute, looking a little bit Luciferian. Science up happening over there, because they've held onto that tightly. This ribbon is a symbol, and it goes back centuries, of the snake. And up the very top, which you can't really see, is a Luciferian. Oh, between those last two kind of trees there, you can just see what looks like a bit of a skirt and maybe, women's legs, and then onto you can see a bit of a legs. That's a Luciferian fellow, a scaly fellow, dancing with a very skimpily clad woman, because with ancient mystery religion, it's all has sexual connotations, very much corrupted, and that's been what they've really wanted to do, particularly with the West, to destroy some of the morals that we were once known for. And so the other thing with the United Nations is that it hates nationalism. And under the shadow, Agenda 21 in New Zealand, and in We're Revolting, I've got quite a few quotes of them determined to destroy nationalism. It's one of the reasons why they don't want you keeping your babies at home. You get them into childcare. got to destroy, divide and conquer, put mum over here at work and dad over here, put the children into different classes here and our babies over there. So we come together at home, we may have the same surname, we eat together, we shelter together, but that's about all. That family isn't there. And they know if they can destroy the family, they've destroyed the community. Destroy the community, they've destroyed the nation. And that's what John Key's flag referendum of 2015 was all about. It was a people's referendum. And we're talking here, getting ready to look at He Wakaputanga in a bit more fully. And that was really one of the aims of that, was to make sure that He Wakaputanga was buried forever, because it was the people's referendum. And if the people had voted yes, that would have been the end of it. But thankfully, we didn't. And so it did not win the day. And it was hobbled with quite a few issues as well. That was very interesting. And I might say during that referendum, the He Wakaputanga flag was presented. Ardern was actually on that board of working out what the flag is going to be. He's got to have the next Prime Minister there, school her up. But that particular session was closed down abruptly. The media were told to go straight away, and the whole thing was airbrushed from the process. Someone put this together just to get a little bit of a feel for that red peak flag that suddenly appeared when that ISIS-type flag that John Key's favourite was put to one side. Here is a Phoenician priestess, and you can see the swastika there. It's an ancient mystery religion. It goes right back when Nazi Germany, Hitler said that Himmler was his Ignatius Loyola, and he was taking Germany back to the ancient mystery religion. And it's not hard to find all the evidence for that still today. But they're trying to get us back to that moment in history. And that's what Ardern's voluntary national review is all about. It is a auditing to the movers and shakers of the United Nations, letting them know how close we are to Agenda 2030 living. Agenda 2030, they're running behind actually. Originally it was Agenda 21. They were hoping to have us back to the Dark Ages by the turn of the century. It didn't quite work. They were behind time there. So they brought out Agenda 2030, which is the same thing, by the way. It's not anything different. It's just got a little bit more ideas of how to move forward, particularly the Sustainable Development Goals. This is also another book that Ardern's government put out in 2018, The Start of a Conversation on the Value of New Zealand's Human Capital. You're owned. You haven't got a life of your own. You're just capital. And they will decide what they do with you. And one I haven't brought today is their Waikato initiative, which basically is to drive everyone out of the Waikato. That's going to be the first spot. So keep your eye on that. Everything's to drive us out of the Waikato. I live in the Waikato. Also part of Divide and Conquer is He Purpur, that conveniently came up when He Wakaputanga was starting to become a little bit more in mainstream conversations. He Purpur means the breaking waters. That is no surprise to me, because we're looking at the law of the sea. The law of the sea, S-E-A, the law of the sea, S-E-E. They're changeable. It's all that word trickery. The papacy, the Pope, is called the Holy See. So international law is basically canon law. And when Martin Luther won the day, he actually threw the canon law into the fire. He was so angry that such nefarious laws had come into being and causing problems for the people. So we have today, a good sound set of socialists And that's one thing with the elites is, and they did the same in pagan Rome. They would conquer a town or a city or a nation, and they'd say, "Oh, just life as it goes, guys, just carry on." And they just snuggle up underneath, no creativity, and they would just like a veil, just come under whatever that nation had. A little bit of tweaking, but basically they did the same, and that's papal Rome too, just snuggles under Christianity, but the ancient mystery religion is still there in their rhetoric. It's not hard to find. So what is all this about? What is this hurry to trade out our flag, to sell us off to United Nations, that when in 2030 you will own nothing and you will be happy? You know, what is happening? And the race is on to make sure that they win before He Wakaputanga gains enough traction to squeeze them out of town. So now we're just going to spend a little bit of time looking at He Wakaputanga. This is the flag, the United Tribes flag, that declares the jurisdiction of a sovereign and independent nation of New Zealand. The declaration was He Wakaputanga Declaration, and it has always just been there. It was here. This is a native rugby team that went on a world tour in 1888, 1889 to Australia, England, Canada, and you can see the He Wakaputanga flag there. You'll notice that's got a 5-pointed star. There were variations that came out after the 8-pointed star, but they're just variations on the solid United Tribal flag. The Boer War and the very end of the 1800s, the troops, they got their medal with Victoria on one side and the United Tribes flag on the other side, He Wakaputanga flag on the other side. So they fought under our sovereign flag of our country. We come to World War II and we've got the 28th Maori Battalion. 28 because the Declaration of Independence and Sovereignty, He Wakaputanga, was signed on the 28th of October 1835. So even in World War II, it had a lot of authority and prestige. And today we see it at many of the protests around the country. I don't watch mainstream media, but if I do see something on the internet, very few flags, He Wakaputanga flags, although in reality there are many in the marches. So it's interesting the narrative that mainstream media is still putting out there. So how did it all come about? In the beginning of the 1800s, Maori were trading in big ships, the same as many of the other countries were trading. The problem with the Maori trading ships was that they didn't have a flag. They had a flax stained or dyed flax around their mast, because that's the way Maori did things. But when it went into British ports, it wasn't recognised because, you know, there's no flag. They couldn't get over that little problem. So their boats were being impounded. Hone Heka went to see King George, here he is, King George IV, to organise how they might get round this. And it was clearly decided that they needed a trading flag. And he started the process. He didn't live long enough to finish it, and his brother William IV, who was also King of Hanover, King of England, King of Hanover, and he really seemed to have a real heart for different nations. He was doing a lot of things in Germany there in Hanover to secure freedoms and rights for those people. And he recognised the same in New Zealand. He would have well known that they were under the Jesuit power, because his father, George III, was there during the American War of Independence. King George III was well into slavery because he was controlled by the Jesuits that are into slavery. But the one thing that William decided to do was to agree to allow Maori to have their nation as sovereign and independent. The French were coming, the Spanish were coming. They needed safety at home. They needed safety out in their trading. And one thing he did recognize is New Zealand had no indigenous snakes. And he said that we were a very blessed country. And he said, we're going to do this to keep the snakes out. And here we are, back at the Vatican. You'll see the building there. This is the public building, public assembly, audience hall. Looks very much like a snake to me. This is the inside. Looks very much like a snake to me. This is the Jesus that is on the stage there. Jesus is the enemy of the ancient mystery religion. So whenever you see a skinny, sickly Jesus, that's a statement. They're just letting you know. And so I don't know about you, but that looks like a snake skull to me. Yeah. So that King William IV knew exactly what he was doing. And he wanted New Zealand, he wanted Māori to have their own country and not be hijacked like he knew his country was and like he knew that America was. Europe was pretty much in the hands of the Jesuits anyway. The New World was for the Protestants to find a place where they weren't being persecuted. You know, John Bunyan's beautiful story of Pilgrim's Progress. And they left on the Mayflower and the Speedwell from Southampton and toddled on their way to the New World. So King William IV knew clearly that our country, Te Aroa, New Tarini, it was called New Tarini. It was a French word, new territory. But Aotearoa, New Tarini, was to be sovereign and independent. So the Rangatira chose from several flags, and this is the United Tribes flag that they chose. It had the red King George, it was white, and then on this quadrant it had another red King George. It had a black primbrae, and then an 8-pointed star in each of those 4 little quadrants up there in the corner. I've had one Māori lady tell me that there were 8 initial waka that came to New Zealand, so that was the 8 points was very important. Another Māori lady said that that had to do with sovereignty and mana, so that is another reason why there was an 8-pointed star. As I say, from 18, it was flown on ships in 1834, and it was we had the declaration in 1835, and from 1835 through to about 1840 there were different variations on that. Now, you know, even before this declaration was proclaimed, it was proclaimed at Waitangi, Ngāpuhi, and some of the tribes up there signed. They invited all the tribes to join. They embraced non-Māori as part of the whānau, adopting them in, and that the land would be a land of peace. And sadly, even before this signing, with a 21-gun salute, by the way, out in the Bay of Islands, royally proclaiming this a flag as jurisdiction of a sovereign and independent country. The flag had already gone over to William IV to be royally proclaimed as well, and Busby, his resident here, signed on his behalf. This was a wet ink signature. This was not 2 corporations, this was flesh and blood agreement. But we already had trouble brewing before the signatures were dry, and in fact after, and that was the New Zealand Company. And they did a lot of work trying to get mass immigration into the country very, very early. Exactly what they're doing today. You probably are very aware what's happening to Europe and to Britain, just you know, paid and funded by the elite. Soros giving free phones for all these 30-year-old men that are telling them when they get to the border that they're 15. You know, it's just men army-aged men that are just flooding in. Some countries are resisting, but the EU, which is the United Nations daughter sort of corporation, I guess, is trying to cause trouble there for them, Hungary being one of them. But here we go. So when we look at the New Zealand company, we find, oh, okay, so we've got a Whig MP involved. Oh, that's the Venetians. Yeah, too right it is. It's the Jesuits. And who else is here? People that were involved, men that were involved in the East India Trading Company. So New Zealand is starting to get hijacked, infiltrated. And it was the East India, it was the New Zealand company that were bringing in, as I say, many, many people. It got to a stage, not just with the people they brought in, but the sealers that came and the whalers that came, that New Zealand was, particularly Russell's, was known as the hellhole of the Pacific. And that was another reason why Maori had to call out to Britain to say, do something, because, and why they needed a flag, because Britain had no jurisdiction in New Zealand. There needed to be an agreement. And the declaration, He Wakaputanga Declaration, is that the flesh and blood monarchy of Britain would save us, come and defend us from our enemy. We have an enemy on our shore right now, and we should expect the monarchy of Britain to come and save us. But that's a different story as well, as we know. We're no longer in a democracy here in New Zealand. We're already in a dictatorship. So the New Zealand company also raised its own version of He Wakaputanga, and that's the six-pointed star. And they designed that and put that together on their voyage to New Zealand. Now, another mover and shaker was the Wakefield family, and they really opened up the floodgates of immigrants and just made sure that people were just brought in willy-nilly. He also, along with the East India, with the New Zealand company, fomented most of the land wars, Maori land wars. And this is in Wishart, the Great Divide. And he goes into that quite significantly. He's a researcher, a journalist, and he goes to primary sources, not just hearsay. And we can identify the Wakefields and the New Zealand company for causing a lot of that early strife to really start polarizing a peaceful nation at that stage. Around that stage as well, back here, the East India Company, it suddenly just disappeared in 1858. So just keep that in your mind, because we'll come back to that in a minute as well. So here we are. This is the Shaw-Saville line. They put out a postcard. So clearly something very significant is happening here. It's a very strong postcard. We can see HMS Alligator out in the bay doing its 21-gun salute at some stage, no doubt. Māori, the settlers, and Busby and his chaps there. So definitely something very solidly happened right there and then. This is just some proof of the immigration, you know, free passage. Come on, come and let's get moving. Come and singles, you're wanted, everyone's wanted. Come over, let's just flood the country. The wars that took place. And then we get to perhaps one of our biggest hijacking in a way, and that's the Treaty of Waitangi. There's lots of reasons why the treaty was called for. Basically, it was the finishing of the hostilities between the Crown and Māori, because don't forget, Māori had their land taken from them. They were really disenfranchised. Of course, they're going to stand up and fight for themselves. So, I mean, I haven't looked into it deeply enough to understand exactly why Māori decided, yes, okay, we'll sign this, but it was to cease hostilities predominantly. There had been a skirmish down in, I think it was Port Jackson, which is now Nicholson, which is now Wellington, and the French were coming back, and some Maori thought that was Utu on the way as well. So there were lots of different things happening at the time. But the Treaty of Waitangi sits on the He Wakaputanga Declaration. It's very clear. It doesn't secede sovereignty or independence of the country. But of course, that's been the biggest hijack of the nation right down to today, when no one really understands. And no Māori are here, worried about Māori. Māori are here, wanting wrongs put right. And we're not connecting. We're not allowed to connect. And it's time that we, stop those few and very few giving us the history they want us to have, because that's part of that Hegelian dialectic, which they use all the time, where they're over here, and then you swing the pendulums from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. And the synthesis is that we'll be totally globalized and living Agenda 2030 in no time at all. So at Treaty of Waitangi, up in the upper marae was the Wakaputanga flag. What they did in the lower marae is they swapped it out for the white primbre, and then they lowered that, and up went the Union Jack. And then the flag we've got now, I think, came in around 1906, but the Union Jack came in 1840. Problem being is the upper marae is where things are ratified, the agreement is solid, the celebrations are made, and that He Wakaputanga flag was never lowered. All the trickery was done in the lower marae. The Shore Savile line took on the He Wakaputanga flag, and this is, some people are thinking that when Queen Elizabeth came in the 1950s, that she put up the He Wakaputanga flag as acknowledgement that that was our flag. It's not quite true. She charted the Shore Savile line, and that is their flag. So it wouldn't have mattered what port they had entered, that would be it. Once we get moving along, we start to see that Maori initiatives as being a sovereign and independent nation started being hijacked as well. So we have Te Karere, the Maori messenger was the native post, and it divided early on in the 1800s to native telegraph and native post. Once you get to that orange line, that's sort of the late 1800s, and then the government of the day, it was called the Settlers government out of New South Wales, which is basically what we've got now, but it's corporatized, it's moved on, rebranded. So all these different organizations here that we know very well all started to be owned as state-owned enterprises, and then obviously sold off, and the government ended up with a lot of money, and Māori got absolutely nothing. Another example, and there's many examples, this is the Wakapapa of native couriers. You have the native shipping here. This Union Steamship Co. came in. Shore Savile really wasn't in direct line. They were involved there, but it was really P&O lines. And Māori gave their Haast eagle, that big, I think it's got a 22-foot wingspan. It's extinct now. It often used to hunt on moa. It's the biggest eagle in the world before it was extinct. And it was those colours that originally Māori used on their mast when they were trading. And Māori gifted those colours to the Union Ship Co. And P&O lines today still have those colours of red, gold, blue and white. So there it is, still all these decades later, they're running with the colours. Those colours, Māori gave them those colours so they could come into New Zealand waters, into Te Moana, Nui a Kiwa, all that Pacific area. That's what they were given those colours for. You'd never know that today. So here is the bird, just to give you a bit of a feel, what that bird looked like. It was an enormous bird. There are skeletal remains. So here we go. What do we have here? Ah, you're owned. You are controlled. That was there in Cornwall. Logan Campbell put that up. It has a watermark, not a real one, engraved one right round the edge, just to remind us we're lost at sea, we're dead, we're corporations, because our government today is a corporation. It can only contract with corporations, so we have to die, be a corporation. That went up on One Tree Hill as a memorial to Māori. They were never expecting Māori to survive. I've got the evidence for that. It's shocking. They'd already decided this ethnicity was on the way out. Yeah. Now that's not we the people, and this is the problem. They hide under we the people, oh, you non-Māori, because we take the flak often. They have the agendas, they have the plans, and they just give the narrative that suits, and they hide under the shadows. But we need to know that, because we need to push back against it and put it back at the people's feet where it belongs. And what do we have up at the Waitangi? Oh, hello, another obelisk. Owned, controlled. In 1986, under the Labour government, but actually under Palmer, there was a coup in the night. And what they did is they gave the flesh and blood Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the flick. She was pushed sideways, and they created their own jurisdiction. And it's Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand. It's not a person. It's just a title. It's got the Queen there, Her Majesty. So you know, over our heads, it all seems fine to us. Nothing to see here, people. This is another Ian Wishart article, just the headlines there, and basically what it did was meant that we no longer had the Queen that we could call upon. We no longer had the flesh and blood monarchy to call upon as a sovereign and independent nation. It also harks back to a 1958 legislation. Just need to find it here. I've got another bit of paper, which they tried to disappear, and that is the native, beg your pardon, it's the Constitutional Act of 1852. So we don't think we have a constitution, but we have a Constitutional Act of 1852. Section 71, I'll read you that in a minute, but just remember that. The New Zealand Company just disappeared in 1858 when the Native Districts Regulation Act came into play. And then there was also the Constitutional Act of 1852. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Bottom line for right now is the Queen has gone. We are stranded. We are in no man's land. We don't seem to have He Wakaputanga to stand on, our lawful de jure parliamentary system with our lawful de jure flag, yet we've no longer connected to a flesh and blood monarchy who has decreed and declared will come and save us should a foreign invader come. And this is what we have, a foreign invader. Now, there was a communication between Gregory Bowen, the Consulate General, just a year or so ago with a guy called Alistair. And this conversation, as you can see here, I won't read the whole thing, but basically there has not been the crown for a generation, couple of generations, for the last generation. Hasn't been a crown of England for the last couple of generations, because in 1986, in the middle of the night, between national, don't think this is a Labour thing here, doesn't matter if you're national or Labour, that's the swamp, it is the elite's jurisdiction. They will take us to the gulag via fascism, or they'll take us to the gulag via socialism. They don't care. Part of that Hegelian, let them have Labour for a while, let them have national for a while, then we will get our synthesis, which is globalized. All right, so let's remind ourselves of some of the documentation. Back at William IV, he had what's known as Halsbury's law books, and he had this, his parliament write this here on 12.1. New Zealand Parliament cannot derogate from the sovereign supremacy of England, and England cannot derogate from the sovereign supremacy of the Maori nation assembled in Parliament at Waitangi. So it means that England cannot steal our sovereignty, and we cannot take British sovereignty. We are our own people. Now that is in the law book. End of story. And once put into force, it cannot be repealed. So the bottom line here is He Wakaputanga is still here, alive. It just needs to be actioned. It cannot be repealed by any later parliament. Its provisions can merely be brought forward into current legislation because a later parliament cannot derogate from its forefathers' legislation. So He Wakaputanga is solid. Now this is the Native Districts Regulation Act number 4, and this is really quite interesting for non-Māori, because this helps us together as a nation come together and fight together. And this is half castes and other persons of mixed race living in members of any native tribe, and all Aboriginal natives of any of the islands of the Pacific Ocean shall for the purpose of this act be deemed to be persons of native race. So this act was a sneaky act because the settlers had come, but the elite, that few, didn't really want to have two different ethnicities to deal with. So they brought this Native Districts Regulation Act in to clump us all together. We're all natives. So that means if you're non-Māori, you can choose. I'll call myself a settler and I will come under the government led by a Dern, or I'll call myself native and I'll come under He Wakaputanga. That is our legitimate decision, choice for us today. We can come under He Wakaputanga and move out of this jurisdiction. They thought they had us, but they didn't have us. That's our choice. It is there. Then we have the New Zealand Constitutional Act of 1952, and it says, whereas it may be expected that the laws, customs, usages of the Aboriginal or native inhabitants of New Zealand, so far as they be not repugnant to the general principles of humanity, should to the present be maintained for the government of themselves in and for relations and to dealing with each other, and that particular districts should be set apart within which laws, customs and usages should so be observed. So we clearly are an independent and sovereign nation. Now, there are others. For time's sake, I'm not going to read it, but we've got the Statutes of Great Britain, Ireland in 1839, and it says that we are independent and sovereign. Full stop. That's in their books. There's the Statute of Great Britain, Ireland. 57 George III, 1817, and it was correspondence to the Secretary of State relative to New Zealand, Great Britain Colonial Office. So we have today a government that's actually floating on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. So when we see New Zealand government, we think that's our government. It's just a logo for a corporation that's floated in the US. So that means we have a foreign power governing system pretending to be our government, they're not, on our shores. That's treason, that's war. We should be able to call upon the monarchy to come and save us. We can't get through to the monarchy for various reasons. The Governor General here doesn't seem to be very activated. So the other problem too here is that it's a corporation, and there is a Clearfield doctrine that basically says, what the Clearfield doctrine is saying is that when a private commercial paper is used by corporate government, then government loses its sovereignty status and becomes no different than a mere private corporation. And, specifically for today with the jab, specific performance based upon its corporation statutes or corporation rules, then the government, like any private corporation, must be the holder in due course of a contract or other commercial agreement between it and the one upon it demands for specific performance are made. So we need to have a contract if she wants us to have anything in our arm. So where do they get their jurisdiction from? Well, they're traded through the USA Securities and Exchange Commission, and so the USA have given them their jurisdiction, and it's down in the Antarctic, and it's known as the Ross Dependency, because it is totally dependent on the USA. The Queen, or the head, the monarchy, is the Queen down there, and this Dame Cindy Kero is the Governor General. So I say collect them all up, get them into some snow gear, and pop them down there. They can go home. They can go home. Yeah. So we have a dilemma. It's all trickery. This is exactly the same going back to ancient times. They just snuggle in and no one needs to see them. So it begs the question, are we part of the British Commonwealth? Have we got the Magna Carta in any form that we can really stand upon? I sent my oath into the Barons at the beginning of the year, saying that I stood with them with the Magna Carta. They're no longer taking people's oaths now, but I'm just wondering, well, was it worth even doing, quite frankly, because we were never a British colony. We were never part of the Commonwealth. I've done my affidavit of truth. I've sent it to all these people. Now, obviously not Patsy now, but she got one as well, saying that I'm a flesh and blood. I am here. I am not a corporation. I am no longer dead. I'm no longer lost at sea. I'm a flesh and blood person. I carry that with me. Now, have I tried to get through borders? Didn't know a country was divided into small countries. No, I haven't, because I don't think it will really work. We're not living in a dictatorship, in a democracy now. There is no rule of law. It's what the captain says. This is international law, admiralty law. What the captain says goes, and a captain can change out. I've also got my C card from the Māori Security Rangers. Had that all year as well. The problem with that is I have a diplomatic sea pass. They are Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, so they embrace the whole Pacific rather than just New Zealand. That's why they have an embassy here. So in some ways, it's not really helping me as a national of this country. So then we come to where I'm putting my lot in these days, and that is with the Wakamaninga Māori government of Aotearoa Nutareni. And it works like this. Under He Wakaputanga jurisdiction, the Wakamaninga Māori government that does not lord us over us, it is over here a true administrative body. It does the roads, it does health, making sure that the hospitals are running, things that I as an independent person do not want to do, things that the little hapu that I belong to doesn't really want to facilitate. They do all that, and they cannot work without hapu community, Māori, non-Māori, making the decisions. That's where traditional Māori and tikanga is. It is in the hapu, not iwi. That's been corporatised so they can deal with our corporate government. But the Wakamaninga Māori government, I am on a couple of committees there. I don't get paid. Most of us are all voluntary because we're so convinced that we need to step out of the swamp jurisdiction into a free jurisdiction of He Wakaputanga. So it's the Aotearoa Nutareni. You can go into the He Wakamaninga Māori government and you enrol with them as a national of Aotearoa Nutareni, and completely different jurisdiction. And the reason why I've decided this is the way I'm going to do it is coming back to Martin Luther, who was our last 500 years ago, took us out of a 1,000-year tyranny. And here he is standing before the, well, this is the king, and also the papacy are all here. And he had we the people behind him. They were out in the streets waiting. This is when he had to recant or die. The scaffolds were already built. It was good to go. Now, he said to the king, and he said to the papal bishops, etc., I will not recant. That means I have a relationship with God, relationship with Jesus. I do not need the Pope. I do not agree that he is the only narrative. I do not believe he is the only source of truth. I do not believe church tradition stands over the Bible. So he stood. Now, he would have gone down for sure, except for one thing. There was a national body there to help him, a bit like the He Wakaputanga or the Wakamaninga Māori government, and that is these princes here. They were princes in different regions of Germany. They were the heads of those regions. And these guys, they all stood up with him and said, yeah, we're going down with Martin Luther. And that finished the lot. If Martin Luther had done it on his own, he had millions behind him. But where do you go with that? You need something that's sort of a more national, bigger body that can hold on to the structure so the country doesn't fall apart. And for me, that's what the Wakamaninga Māori government will do, because if we oust this swamp jurisdiction that we've got dictating to us now, everything's going to collapse, and we don't want that. So what we're doing is we've already got a health council that's going really well. The Ministry of Health, Ardern's Ministry of Health, are eyeballing us. One of the documents that I didn't mention in 1986 when they did the coup, there was a Māori chap who had been in Britain, sorry I haven't got his name, a lawyer there. He was in the House of Lords, and he was able to spin things around and try and mend it. I don't know why it couldn't just be reversed, but somehow it couldn't be, and that's when we got the Whenua Act. Some of you may be familiar with that. I'm not particularly familiar with it. But that went some way of returning Aotearoa New Tarini to being a sovereign and independent nation. So it didn't quite do it as robustly as what it was before 1986, but we've got that. And so, like Martin Luther, he had a governing force with him. I think, for me as an individual, and me in the hapu I'm in, made of Māori and non-Māori, just a group of us that have chosen to stand and be the resistance, I guess. In our locale, we want to make sure we're looking after each other. No one's falling through the cracks. If someone needs food, if someone needs a bit of money in these uncertain times, we are there for each other. So 20 or 30 of us, and it's growing, by the way. And these are people that are saying, yep, I'm going to enroll in Aotearoa New Tarini. It is a numbers game, because this is a tyranny. They're not going to step down. They've spent many hundreds of years getting us to this point. They are not going to step down. So we just need to build and build and build. There'll come a point where the numbers will win the day. So we're still at that phase, but we've got the National Health Council. I've got some brochures too with me, so don't forget to ask, and that will give you a little bit more idea of the structure and the authority of the Wakamaninga Māori government. You can also go onto the website. That's still being created and constructed with new different things happening all the time, so keep an eye on that. Our health also with the Wakamaninga Māori government, the opposition to the World Health Organization that's pushing this pandemic on us is the International Health Alliance, is it, Reese? Yep. They want to come, they're in negotiations right now with the Wakamaninga Māori government saying, how can we come under you? We need your protection. Problem being is they're not here. We've got to work out what that might look for them, because they're all over the country, all over the world, in Europe and all over the place. So we think there's probably a way. We're just going to work through what that might look like, because they're an enormous body of medical people that are standing against this narrative. We're about to start our education council. That's looking really exciting, and I'm going to be on that, so I'm quite keen. So my husband Reese, with about 12 or 13 other people. And there are other councils being raised as well. We've got a lot of police that have lost their jobs due to the mandate. They're very keen to come on board and be police under Aotearoa New Tarini. We have to be a little bit careful there's not a face-off, because once the swamp sees, you know, we've got military, we've got police, we've got to be very careful. They'll bring the CCP in or the United Nations people in. You can see it. So we just need to be careful the way we're doing it. But the biggest thing we need is we the people, numbers building up behind them, like Martin Luther and his people built up behind the princes. So you'll read in the pamphlet, it still goes to the rangatira at Waitangi, so the Wakaputanga Māori government, you know, they're not governing on their own and can go rogue on us. They are facilitating what we, the people, wanted in our communities. We can decide what that might look like for our health. Our Wakaputanga Health Council is big time into traditional Māori health, naturopath, homeopathy, and the good pharmaceuticals. You know, there are some good pharmaceuticals, so it's just a matter of working through all that. It's a great time to be alive, and it's very exciting. We have a lot of fabulous people. We're just trying to work out what our monetary system will be, because when you've got a fiat system, how do you build something on nothing? I don't know. There's lots of things. Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, there's lots of hapus just like the one I'm involved in now. That dollar sign, we're taking that away. Yes, we've got to pay our bills, but we're just, you know, saying okay. And we're part of a time bank. So if I'm a plumber, I can put into the time bank for people, and other people, you know, and then I get other people, you know, it's sort of that. You share your skills, your talents, your information. So that's very exciting as well. So there's lots of, and remember, we weren't pushed out. We didn't choose to come out, beg your pardon. We were pushed out. Ardern made it very clear we were going to be a two-tier society. We're here because we've been pushed out. She wants us to get to the point where we don't survive, but we will survive. And we're just growing all over the country. So what we're doing under He Wakaputanga is standing in our inalienable rights. Because if we don't, the final variant will be communism, a new form. It'll look very much like China. They're already trying to get the credits in now. Stephen Ulrich, he is the CEO of Bayer, and he said this just a few weeks ago. Ultimately, the mRNA vaccines are an example for that cellular gene therapy. I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago in the public, would you be willing to take a gene or cell therapy and inject it into your body? We would probably have had a 95% refusal rate. I think this pandemic has also opened many people's, that'll be the elites, eyes to innovation, to agendas, in a way that was maybe not possible before. So, you know, they proclaim it from the rooftops. You've just got to hear it. Here's the UN. This is their latest bit of sculpture. Now, it's supposed to come from, donated from some poor little chap. What's his name? Where is he? Where is he? There he is, Jacobo and his wife Maria from Mexico. Well, yeah, it looks really Mexican to me. Not. And this is really, it looks very much like the Venetians / Romans, where you've got the lion with the wings. It's supposed to be a jaguar. Jaguars are not, no, it's supposed to be a jaguar. Jaguars are more sleek than that. It certainly doesn't look inviting. And it's been coined by Christians as the beast. And when you look at, again, King James Bible, the beast talks about the power of nations, and the wing talks about the swiftness and the speed of power that will come down like a hammer. So again, they're just announcing it. Don't tell me that little Jacobo down there twiddling with his little wood creations, which is what he was doing, was able to do that. It's a in your face, we've got you. We have here in New Zealand the reimagining regulation for the age of AI. New Zealand is a guinea pig, the pilot project. We're the guinea pig nation. So this is coming thick and fast. If we, on the way here, the number of signs say no to 3 waters, I wouldn't even waste my breath. It's going to happen. We have a government that don't care one iota what we say. They don't need to, because they're not our government. They will do what they are wanting to do. The only way that we can make a stand is actually step out of their jurisdiction and into Aotearoa New Tarini, because they are scared spitless. They really are. They're really worried, and they're starting to look at legislation to push back as well. But we're lawful. We've got to remember that. We don't need to be scared. We're a lawful jurisdiction. And as I think you've appreciated from tonight's talk, we are in a spiritual battle. This is a battle of ancient mystery religion, Luciferian, Phoenicians, oligarchical elites. You know, you can just have a look at what Venice looked like back in the day to know the tyranny that is going to come. This, I'm just about done, people. Thank you for being patient. This is something that I kind of tweaked from one that I saw, a caution that I saw on the Magna Carta, but I carry one of those with me most times, and in case I get stopped, and then I can pull it out, and I'd just like to read this to you, because we need to caution them. They might think they've got the legal upper hand, but we have the lawful upper hand, and they will come before what we're going to be coining as the people's not the court, the People's Council or something. It will be a law and order division of Aotearoa New Tarini, and everyone, doctors, school teachers, headmasters, anyone, the politicians that have been part of this murder, because this is part of the United Nations Agenda 21 depopulation program, will come before the People's Commission, God, at that time. And they will be put in their orange boiler suits when they go down to the Ross dependency or over to China, because remember that the debt to China, that's not ours, that's the corporation's debt. So Jacinda's 160 or 150 million that she's suddenly, well, no, she's now worth that all of a sudden. Well, she can give that to Winnie the Pooh over there in China, and she can spend the rest of her life paying off the debt. So when you become a national of Aotearoa New Tarini, you just go onto the Wakamaninga Māori website, enrolments are there, you enroll that, and there you should. We're really working hard to get the website secure. It is secure because we've got people's data on there, but we're still doing a lot of background stuff. So sometimes the computer's down, or sometimes there's a few little hiccups. So people have got to be a little bit patient for us at the moment, because we didn't realize when we set up, well, not that I set it up, but set up the website, that it didn't have the capacity for the numbers of people that are enrolling. So we're still doing a little bit of work behind the scenes. So sometimes you might go on, or when you enroll, you don't get that automatic letter back saying we've got you. But we've had enrolment officers, and they've been taking people in the oath, or a pledge really it is, like any national would do. I became a citizen of Britain about 10 years ago. My mum's British. And I went down to the consulate in Wellington and I did a pledge just to be a good citizen. Some Christians aren't sure whether that puts it above their oath to God or their love for God. It does not. This is just a basic pledge that any nation would have, bringing people into it. So there's nothing to worry about there. I'm a Christian by my faith, and I had no problems with it because I just knew this fits under. And the whole point of Tikanga is, and He Wakaputanga is sovereignty. So in this jurisdiction, I'm going to be in one of those detention centres. I had my daughter ask me a few weeks ago, well, what's going to happen to you, Mum? I said, well, I'm going to be in a re-education camp soon. And if I don't take the mRNA, I will, be told it's that or lethal injection, what you choose. I mean, that's the bottom line, down the line. The camps are being built now. I believe there's one just being built just outside of Auckland. There are many being built in Britain at the moment, and there's an enormous one just in the southern border of outside Melbourne. So they're coming up now, ready to pop us into. So now is the moment. We have a window of opportunity now to enrol. And there's a book that was written, 3.5% of the population get off their rear end and get out on the streets and do something, you've won the day. And it seems to me that protesting, although it's looking pretty good right now, but I've been protesting for 2 years and it's got less and less. I'm not sure if it's the Kiwi way, but I'm thinking this might be. You know, you can enroll in your PJs, you know? Yeah. So that is, thank you, that is my last slide. How are we going, Richard? Do we want, perhaps if there's supper, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. Badra's here. She's also on one of the committees for the Wakameninga Māori government that I am on, and she would be another great person to talk to.
One comment. My nephew is pretty IT savvy, and he enrolled, and he said he had a very challenging time to enroll, and when they told him about it, they actually said to him, well, they were surprised they weren't getting more people, and he said, well, it's very difficult to get to the situation.
Enrolling, it was the confirmation,
Yeah.
the second step.
Yeah, I think, was it a wee while ago that he enrolled?
They just recently did the
Oh, okay.
and the confirmation.
Oh.
And that's the bit we found was quite challenging.
So,
He writes IT programs, so it's not...
okay. So what you're saying by challenging is once he did his pledge to the enrolment officer, he would have got another letter or an email, and he didn't? Is that what you're saying? He didn't? Because we have had problems there, haven't we, Badra? Because what that next email will be is gives you your link to order your card. I think it's $50 for the card plus whatever it is for registered post. And I'm not sure that that is flowing well at the moment. So our first IT person that we had, he was great, but not really good enough. And so we've got another person that is, world class really. And what's happening sadly at the moment is when he's tweaking this bit, then this bit collapses. So they're trying to, so there's a lot of techie stuff happening in the background. And I mean, we're all just thinking, oh, please, what's happening? Can't do anything about it. It's just, it's just bad timing really.
And like, I'm not a New Zealand citizen, but I still...
Yes, if you're a resident, you can, yes. And if you're German residents in New Zealand from Germany, they are not able to be dual citizens, otherwise they lose their German citizenship. And there are pathways to deal with that as well, so it doesn't become a problem. But on the whole, it should be all right.
Can I ask, so there are some people saying it's a good idea to stand outside the Governor-General's
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think it's a waste of time. See, they don't need to listen to us. We're dead. We're lost at sea. We just don't know it. They're a corporation. When we vote, we don't vote for a prime minister. We vote for a CEO of a corporation. When we enroll, we become employees. The boss doesn't need to hear from us. And that is our problem. There's nothing, this is it. There's nothing else. Yeah.
So do we need to cancel our enrollment vote?
Well, we're not there yet, although we've got Luxon, haven't we? So some people think, oh, it's going to be an early election because her numbers, popularity is plummeting at long last. No, I don't know what we should do. Do we register and then put a no confidence vote on the form? What is it, 100 no confidence? But then how do you know that they'll count that properly? Because we had the Dominion system last time. I was a candidate for NZPP because they were the only party that identified the United Nations as the shop front for all this tyranny. So I just thought, well, I'm not political at all. But anyway, we did it. And we know we got more numbers than what we got on the night. We know we did. And I ran for Topol. And on the night, the numbers were going. And then suddenly, we dropped to 2 point something. And people were saying, what happened to Topol? You know, you were up there 9 point something and then poof. The same system as the USA under a different sort of name we had here in this country. We will never get a fair election again. We just won't. If we, in fact, go to another election, they are doubling down. Doubling down. Mm.
So Monica from the Security Division,
Yep.
she says that the He Wakaputanga comes with instructions, spiritual instructions. Do you know anything about that?
Nope. What, the declaration? Only the declaration. There's no other piece of paper that comes with that. I know the Māori security rangers do not like the Wakaminenga Māori government. Wakaminenga Māori government have reached out to them to make an alliance. And that's what the Health Council, they don't come under the Wakaminenga Māori government because it's not a government to come under. They make an alliance with the security rangers, although Monica's pulled out of that now, so I don't know if she and Peter have drifted apart with their collaborating in there, so I'm not quite sure what the story is there now. But they're not at all keen. But I haven't really had the time to, I think there's some YouTubes, I just haven't looked at them. So there is no spiritual aspect that I know of. It's just a declaration. We've got tikanga, which is a spiritual part of Māoridom, and I think as Māori we need to understand it's there, but the whole point of He Wakaputanga is individual sovereignty, and if I don't want to step into tikanga, that spiritual side of Māoridom, I don't have to. But we are New Zealand, you know. If that's the basis for the Māori nation, we've got to realise that. This is New Zealand, this is a Māori nation.
And as when you step in sovereign underneath this, do you step in that sovereignty as a living woman?
Yes, yes. So you're not under the government, you're a national of New Tarini. We are not changing out a lot of words. Common law has been weaponised, and it doesn't do well when it's weaponised. And I know people that are 20, 30 years, and they still aren't to the bottom of common law. Some people love going into court and fighting under common law. I've got more things to do with my time, quite frankly. I don't want my life to be a fight. So common law is the law of the land of Britain. He Wakaputanga, or customary law, rather, which is what He Wakaputanga acknowledges, is the law of the land of New Zealand. So that's just the way it goes. I think you'll find that a lot of it, well, both of it really sits on the law of God, really, except customary law or the law of the land takes on nuances of the people in that land. So, of course, it's going to be a little bit different, where we've got He Wakaputanga and Britain have got the Magna Carta. And I think William IV said this, or Busby, one of them, said this is New Zealand's Magna Carta. I think it's better, much better, because the Magna Carta did go a long way for the people to gain their freedoms, but probably not far enough. Where He Wakaputanga is our declaration, it is there. It's not something we've had to claw back. I mean, we are in a way now, but the declaration's there, unlike the Magna Carta, which, you know, they had to pull out the king screaming and spitting all the way, King John or whatever his name was, and get him to sign that out there in that paddock under the noble's watch, 1215.
And the code that you have on there?
QR code, that's your information only. but there'll be a PIN number for that as well, a private number you'll get, and that will have all your bits. It's ideally this could be a passport, but you'd have to decide what country you're going to what they would want. But that could also be your driver's license. It'll have all your details in there.
So
Yeah.
why are you going down the avenue of having a QR code?
Because that's the way of the future, really. And in He Wakaputanga, we're not a corporation. We're using the words we want to use, birthday. We're using those words because there's no trickery in it. We're in a jurisdiction that doesn't need to weaponize words. We're not in this jurisdiction where we would be fearful and having to think about, what does that mean in contract law? What does that mean in Black's Law Dictionary or international law or canon law or whatever else? They're all the same, really, just different nuances.
So when you say there's a PIN number to that, does that mean that somebody scans that you have to release it?
How does that work, Badra? No one can just scan and get your information, that I know. Yeah, so that would be just for official. If you had to, say for example, the police got you. Now, how would that work? See, that you wouldn't let them in there. I'm not quite sure how that works. It is I think it's just your database, your information. Yeah, but if the police took you into custody, you could give them your ID card that you're a national of New Tirini, and tell them that they will need to contact the Law and Order Council of New Tirini, that you do not stand under their jurisdiction. Yeah.
So basically we have to get a passport no matter which side we choose?
Yes, because it will depend what country you're going to. They may not say that they're going to accept that at this stage. Because with He Wakaputanga is we've got to build those numbers again. We've got to get big enough that people will take us seriously. We've got all the law on our side. We've got the royal proclaimed document that went to over 50 countries back in 1835. The Wakaputanga government have also reiterated that through the world as well. They've sent out more documentation, just making sure that people realise that we are actually still here. There's been discussion whether we need to go to The Hague and push through, but that's big money and years of work. But there's, everything's on the table at the moment just to see how best, and everything we're doing is for the protection of the people. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
I think if we've got any more questions, if you can give them to us, because we're going to do an interview tomorrow with Antoinette, because we really need to wrap it up. Otherwise, we're going to keep going all night.
There's one lady just here. Could we have her question and then finish it? Make that the last one.
Okay.
Quick questions. With the Māori Security Division, Māori Ranger Security Division, they said that our flag